All right. And we're live. What's up? Illegitimate Scholar here with Doc Brown again, who is no longer tied with the Wayward Rabbler for most appearances. He is now in the lead once again. We'll have to
Wow.
have him back. Yeah. So today we're going to talk about this hypothesis, right? The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. And this is more linguistics, but it has cultural implications. And like I said in the description, which you might not have read, I've been uncritically repeating this idea for many, many years. So this is very interesting to me because, I was taught this in anthropology classes, right? So it's not linguistics, but anthropologists. It's relevant to cultural anthropology. And I've just been saying this for years. And then offhandedly, Doc Brown is like, yeah, that's not true. And I was like, what? Oh, no. I've been
Well,
telling people this.
it's definitely not true in the way that people who believe in it think it's true.
Well, yeah.
It's not really a thing, as the kids would say.
Right. Well,
yeah.
let's get into the specifics of why. I'm sure people are going to love this. And please like the video. Is it your actual 69th birthday, or is that a joke? I can't tell because the number is 69. If it were 68 or 70, I'd believe you. But 69 sounds like a joke, and it might not be. We got I'm 29 years old. I'm about to be 30 here, and yeah, right. But the audience is in general. Look. I said this the other night, and people were jumping on me, telling me that I was like talking about, oh, you think we're all old? It's like, well, statistically, it's a number, right? So like, I look at my audience stats on Twitter and YouTube, and I see that my audience is older than me, which is fine, which is great. I've always been an old soul. I've said it before.
That's a compliment.
Uh-huh.
To have an audience older than you is a compliment, I think. But that's
all right. Remember to put the cart back.
Oh, yes.
Like the video, please. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, that's from WBS Apparel. They're not a sponsor, but they are friends of the show.
Carts. Yes.
Yeah. Put it back. Patreon is $2 a month right below. And you can check that out, as well as Axios Fitness, which is very helpful to me as somebody with a ton of chronic injuries, which we will not get into the specifics of. All right, let's do it. Talk to me. Tell me why I'm wrong.
Okay.
So, is the opportunity to learn.
Let's maybe get in. So there's a couple different ways we can go. Let's start with the ideas themselves, and then go out from there. So I will say caveats, some disclaimers. I am clearly biased against the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis for reasons that we'll get into, and it is my decided intention to convert others to this way of thinking. So I will do my best to steelman the other side, but I am clearly arguing from a position. Again, I am arguing from an informed position, but I'm selling you something here, which is not to say that I'm wrong, but know that if somebody here is a Sapir-Whorf lover, I don't hate you. I think you're wrong. I am gonna be let's say less than charitable towards the theory. So just putting that out there.
Right. And this also isn't a debate, right? Because I don't have maybe if I like had a better understanding of it, but this is just like a little fact, what I thought was a little fact that I thought was well established, because PhDs, crucially in anthropology, who also probably just don't know that linguistics has changed on this. So I'm not here to defend it, and I'm not capable of doing that just because it's not my field, right? So
I think also part of it too is this, there's some as one of our previous presidents has said, there's some strategery behind this. The strategery is that so many people still say that language determines thought. Non-linguists say this all the time. It's a widely spread idea. So for me, I have to like punch back extra hard because it's like a salmon swimming upstream, right? You got to like push against the current. So the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis really is actually just the Whorf hypothesis, or it's also sometimes called Whorfianism, which is a cool name, I guess. It makes me want to grab my batleth and go start, fighting. I was like, Whorf to the bridge. Why is it called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis? So it's named after two guys who did work together, and particularly the earlier guy influenced the later guy. So Edward Sapir, who was, I guess, well, he's American. I mean, his family was Jewish and fled Eastern Europe because for obvious reasons.
Oh, and he died in New Haven, Connecticut, very near my hometown.
Connecticut connection there. Yeah. Edward Sapir, who, and again, my beef is not with these fine gentlemen. They actually did a lot of really good work too. I just think it's kind of a shame that what they're remembered for is their absolute worst idea. And this is maybe something like of a cautionary tale to academics, is that, like, be careful of what you propagate, because, or put out there, because you might be remembered for your absolute dumbest idea. So Sapir,
many such cases.
And to be really, really autistically narrow, it isn't even really. So Sapir starts this idea, but it's really Whorf, Benjamin Lee Whorf, who really takes it and runs with it. So I don't even know. We can't interview any of these people. I don't even know how Sapir would feel with being lumped in with this.
Oh, and Whorf is also died in Connecticut after being born in Massachusetts, a New England man.
New Englanders. It's you know. I'm thinking of Yarvin quotes about Harvard Yard right now. Anyhow, we'll leave that for where it is. Yeah, it's Ivy Leagues. What have you done? Whorf, it really is more of Whorf's idea. So what is this idea? The idea is, to be very blunt, and we'll get less blunt as we go, is your language determines the way you view the world and think about and experience the world. So intuitively, I think a lot of us, that feels correct to a lot of us. And again,
yeah, that's why I never questioned it.
Again, I'm going to be very critical, but also I'm going to try to also be very generous at the same time. I actually do think this in a way that Whorf wouldn't say. So hopefully this will come out as we go. But Whorf's, so obviously we use language to talk about the world. We use language to categorize the world around us, our own selves. I mean, for Pete's sake, we have a name and we call other people by names. And so, like, naming things is just one example of all the ways that, like, language influences our perception of the world. So that I actually agree with. But that is not necessarily that's not really the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is not just that language influences the way we view the world and that we can use language to talk to other people and conceptualize the world. Of course, I agree with that. Anyone you'd have to be crazy to not think that.
And that's true on its face, right?
Yeah,
just because, yeah.
And I think humans, ever since humans have really started talking and particularly thinking about talking, so let's say like philosophy of language / linguistics, which goes back to like ancient cultures, not linguistics per se, but philosophy of language, of like the power of words, right? You find this in world mythologies, world religions, folklore, everywhere, right? Like, you know, you say the magic word, open sesame, and the cave opens, or right, you know, you say Rumpelstiltskin and he doesn't have power anymore, right? So like humans have innately understood the power of words ever since we've been talking. It shows up in our stories that are completely ancient stories, going all the way back to the beginning of talking. So that, of course, I agree with that. What Sapir and particularly Whorf were trying to say is your individual language, your particular language, determines the way you think, with the implication being very much in a Always Sunny kind of sense. The implication, because of the implication being that, if I speak English, I think in a quote unquote English way. And if somebody speaks a language that is not English, they must think in an entirely different way than I do. And if they do think in an entirely different way than I do, that must be a result of their language.
Okay.
So it's like a very deterministically kind of. So sometimes this is called linguistic relativism.
And linguistic determinism,
but it's also connected to determinism. So I don't know how relative it actually is. I think it's really more deterministic. You're saying that like it's like almost like sometimes people have like a clockwork, quote unquote clockwork philosophy of the universe. Well, this is like a quote unquote clockwork philosophy of language, that I think about the world in an English way because my language makes me. Yeah.
The question. So you're saying that language doesn't absolutely determine thought, but merely influences?
No, what I'm saying is that, so I'm doing my best and probably failing because I don't like this idea. I'm doing my best to steelman this idea. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis would say, it's not that you don't have your own thoughts, but it's that your thoughts are filtered through your language.
Very good way of putting it. Yeah, that was my understanding of it.
And again, of course, thoughts are filtered through language, but the idea, it goes one step further. It says your thoughts are filtered through your native language.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So, again, this feels right.
Thank you.
It feels good. Like
Yeah.
John, again, I always cite him because he's one of my faves. John McWhorter, linguist at Columbia right now, currently working there and writing there. He talks about how like this idea feels great, right? Like you just want more of it. Yeah, of course, man. Like the language I speak, I use the words, right, for the things around me. And so if my language doesn't have a word for that, I guess I just can't say it. I guess I am really constrained by my language.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with this idea is that, and really honestly, Whorf and Sapir, I don't know why they had no excuse because they were both multilingual people, particularly Sapir, because Sapir didn't speak, he learned English later in life. And so he really should have known this. And I don't know how you don't get this, because once you learn another language or two or three or four languages, like you are instantly struck by two things. What you're struck by first is that, oh my gosh, like whatever language I'm learning really doesn't work like my native language. So let's assume, again, I know not all of your audience is English native speakers, but we're
Right.
speaking in English, so we'll just make that assumption.
Most of them are.
Like, yeah, a lot of them are.
Yeah.
Let's say like, oh my gosh, like, if I can just use an example of a closely related language actually to English, which is German.
Mm-hmm.
But closely related being sort of like with a big asterisk. Yeah, it's closely related, but it's very different. Like when I teach German, so one of the things that my American students have the hardest time with is that there are German nouns come in one of three flavors. We call these grammatical genders. There's masculine, feminine, and neuter. And you literally cannot know what gender a noun is unless you've memorized it. So every single noun in like the German language must be memorized. You have no way of guessing. You can't look at the word and know. You can guess. You have a 1 in 3 shot of getting it right. Like students are like, oh my gosh, this is insanely hard. Like this just is not how English works. I'm like, I know it's a different language. It just runs on a very different kind of operating system.
Does Dutch work that way as well?
Dutch has two genders. They've winnowed it down to two. Swedish has two. Danish has two. Icelandic has the original three. Some dialects of Norwegian have the three. Some dialects of Norwegian have the two. English has no grammatical gender anymore except in our personal pronouns, he, she, it.
Were they removed at some point? Because Dutch is the closest to English, right? It's closer to Middle English, but
removed by Vikings, which is a topic for another day.
Okay. Sorry, continue. Just curious.
I want to talk about that. There's a whole thing that happened in Middle English. Basically, the English language got hit on the head by Danes, and it is suffering a head wound. And as such, it lost a lot of things that it used to have. So anyhow,
English.
Like students are confronted by this and like, this is just not like English at all. Why does German have this? And then I tell them, okay, so like 1,000 years ago, English had something almost exactly the same. We had three largely completely arbitrary gender categories for all of our nouns, but we don't have that anymore. So
thank God for the Haida of Europe.
The Haida of Europe, indeed. The Tlingit of Europe.
Yes.
Yeah. It is really the Vikings in the end. Everyone says blame Canada, or at least South Park does. I say blame the Vikings, but that's me. This is coming from English compared to German, which are very closely related languages, actually. And look at all the differences you can get there, right? You can jump even farther to to bring it into what Sapir and particularly Whorf were talking about. So Whorf uses the Hopi language, the indigenous Hopi language of American Southwest. Yeah, he uses the Hopi language as sort of his example. He uses that as kind of the experiment, quote unquote. And I do mean that in kind of a weird, freaky, big science way, because we'll get into that here in 2 seconds. So when you go into
not know they were related to Aztecan. Interesting.
Uto-Aztecan, I believe. Yeah, Uto-Aztecan. Yeah.
Is that what the Mexica spoke? Doesn't matter. I'm digressing.
I'm not an Americanist. I don't have. I'm not an American. Yeah, I'm not. I am not. Yeah, I do European languages, so you'd have to check. Yeah. So initially this feels really correct. Like, oh, of course, like the Germans, they have 3 arbitrary categories for gender, so they just must view the world in an entirely gendered way, right? So students sometimes are like, oh my gosh, like, why is this so like this way, I'm like, well, it's an inheritance that the German language has retained and the English language has lost. And they're like, oh, so do Germans refer to chairs as he, and to how, and to and to addresses and streets as she? I'm like, well, yeah, but it's not like Germans view chairs as being dudes and streets being chicks. It's just something that's in the language. It doesn't really affect the way Germans think about the world. It's not like it's encodes some deep level of like cultural affinity or cultural values. It's just part of the language.
Right.
So it's
Okay.
difficult for me to break students out of that because they kind of fall into this trap of Whorfianism, and they don't know they're doing it. They don't know that's called Whorfianism, but they're like, oh, well, it's just the German language prescribes the way the Germans think. I'm like, no, it doesn't. They don't look at a chair and think it's a man. They just refer to it as grammatically masculine, der Stuhl. But that's just part of the grammar. It's not like changing the way Germans think. You got to be crazy to think that. That would be weird, right? It just would be strange. That's not how language works. When you go to Hopi or some indigenous language of the North America that is not related to any Indo-European language, things get even quote unquote weirder. And I mean that in the best of ways. When linguists say something is weird, we don't mean it's bad. We mean it's beautiful, different, cool,
Absolutely.
worthy of preservation, an awesome part of humanity's cultural inheritance. The Hopi language is insanely complex. It does all sorts of things that English will never make you do. It requires you to make all sorts of very minute changes to verbs to accurately reflect exactly what's going on in every situation. It's a beautiful thing. It's sadly an endangered language. We should all hope. Like, I will never learn the Hopi language. I don't have time to. I really hope that people do learn it. I support the Hopi in their quest to maintain their language, as I do.
The Hopi language is being preserved better than most of endangered languages.
Hopi,
it's barely endangered, but it is endangered.
Hopi and Navajo are doing kind of like okay, is my impression.
Yeah. And they have a lot of people, and they're both their reservations are both they're both pretty
sizable.
They're sizable, and they're also pretty they're and this has a lot of economic negatives, but they are very like what's the word? Separate, but like isolated, which is bad economically, but it's good for preservation of language.
Yeah. So like the Hopi language that Whorf is using this in order, we'll get into this in 2 seconds because I have quotes from Whorf. Whorf is looking at the Hopi language, but in reality what he's doing is he's looking at the Hopi language via the lens of Sapir's work on the Hopi language. So Sapir was something of a mentor to Whorf. So it's not, I couldn't figure out, and somebody probably correct me on this. So I'll just be very general about it. I don't know how much Whorf actually did on his own with the Hopi language. Maybe he did. And if he did, he definitely did it poorly. My impression is, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, because as an academic, I'll tell you what I believe and also tell you what I don't believe. I try to be very honest.
Thank you.
I do
very rare for academics.
I do well because I always hedge. I had a very good dissertation advisor who was anal about this, and it's a good thing to be.
Right.
I do believe, my impression is that it was mostly Sapir. So Sapir did actual field work among the Hopi, along with other indigenous North American populations.
It's quite rare for a linguist to do, right?
Well,
or is it not?
But this was back when it was like we literally have to record these things because they're dying so quickly. So Sapir also probably engaged in some less than ethical human subject kind of practices with indigenous peoples.
In what way?
There was
by like today's standards, right?
Not by today's standards. At the time, there was oh gosh, I forget his name. I think it was one of the last speakers of Yana or some Californian language. I don't know if it's Yana.
Yeah, I don't know anything about natives.
He was the literal last speaker, and he was dying of tuberculosis, and he was a monolingual speaker, and so they brought in Sapir to talk to him because they needed somebody to talk to him. And then Sapir realizes, oh my goodness gracious, this is the last speaker of this language. If it's not Yana, I think it's a dialect related to, don't quote me on that. Anyhow, so Sapir like talks to this guy as this guy is dying, and like Sapir is brilliant, but he's clearly autistic and is so exacting because you have to be as a fieldwork linguist that he like probably speeds up this guy's death a bit because he's like dying of tuberculosis, and he's like Sapir is forcing him to answer questions like in a particular. It's a whole thing. So it's just Any
Also, just a moment, like the
yeah,
last person of your language, like that is
I mean, in some ways,
truly
I
awful.
kind of get it. Like, you want to preserve this thing for posterity, but and
That's
I
still a
wasn't there.
person.
I wasn't there, but yeah, it is gruesome. But I guess if you're dying of tuberculosis and you don't have antibiotics anyhow, I mean, I'm not judging Sapir. I'm just saying, like, the whole thing was a sad situation. I feel both sides of that. And but apparently, the guy who was working with Sapir was super happy to help and super happy to speak his language. And so I mean, I guess, right, as long as your subject is fine with it, I guess. But from a modern IRB would never allow this in a modern
No,
university.
no.
It would just never allow you to be sitting with a terminal patient and like forcing them to answer questionnaires and things and like complex things. It just they would Anywho, it was a
Right.
different
Could have
era.
been some brevity there, but I
Yeah,
understand.
yeah. So anyhow, so I'm not hating on Sapir. Sapir did a lot of really good work. But Sapir had some weird theories. Sapir sort of starts down this, he works with the Hopi and is like, geez, the way that the Hopi language classifies events and time and events inside space and time is very, 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 very different than any European language would. And like the vast majority, shout out to TLE Bird, the vast majority of, so maybe somebody got that. I don't know if there's crossover listenership. The vast majority of words in the Hopi language are actually verbs, which is kind of strange from a European perspective. We have a lot of nouns in Indo-European languages, and obviously a lot of verbs. We also have a lot of like individual names for things, objects, people, places, things, ideas, concepts, nouns versus verbs, which are more like action words or states of being words. Hopi has a lot of verbs, and this does, I mean, it varies. And again, not all indigenous Native American languages, North American languages are related. They're all very different from very different families. There does tend to be a general rule, a tendency, let's say, that there's a lot more verbs in indigenous North American languages than there are in European languages, which is just interesting. So Hopi uses a lot of verbs where we, speakers of quote unquote what begins to be called standard average European with scare quotes languages, we tend to use a lot more nouns. So Sapir is trying to think through this issue and is like, well, why? What does this have to quote unquote say about the Hopi? How does the Hopi's language sort of encode the Hopi culture? Which again, I'm trying to steel man my. These are not even really.
Okay, I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
was like doing like secondary research.
you're
I
good.
just realized this is completely unrelated, but I need to share this right now. The Tlingit speak a language family that is related to the Dine, the
Yeah,
Navajo.
not Dene. Yeah,
Not what? What the
yeah.
heck?
Dene is a big family.
Right, but it's mostly in Alaska and
Yeah, and
northern
then down, but
Canada?
then down in Arizona and New Mexico. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
That's crazy. Okay.
Somebody split off and walked.
They walked
Walked a long
south or
way.
they walked north? Do we know?
I believe they walked south. I'm not.
Okay.
I believe they walked south. I'm not.
Holy crap.
That's not my field. Double check. Everyone double check that. Yeah, I think they walked south. I think that's the idea.
That would make more sense.
Yeah,
But
it would make
okay,
more
I'm
sense.
so
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you
No,
and
you're
say
good.
something unrelated, but what the
No,
hell?
it's related. It gets back
Okay.
to our typology episode, right? So this is all kind of. This is, yeah. Okay. So Hopi has a lot of verbs, and man, these verbs are complex and similar. Like Hopi verbs are wicked hard. They're wicked beautiful, but they're wicked hard, wicked had, as you would say. They take on so many different suffixes, infixes, prefixes, and like they have a lot of irregularity, which shows you that this language has been spoken for an incredibly long period of time without a lot of linguistic, with a lot of like sort of internal linguistic integrity. It's a super fascinating language. Again, I think Hopi is a great language. I'll never learn it, but Sapir is saying, or is starting to ask the question, what does this Hopi language have to say about the Hopi culture? Whorf picks this idea up because he is sort of a colleague of a younger colleague of Sapir. Fun fact, by the way, so Sapir is like hyper autist linguist, like pretty much from early age, like just a very, very smart individual. Whorf is also very, very smart, but Whorf does not start out as an academic. He starts out as a fire inspector
Fantastic.
and an
Love to hear it.
engineer. So which is, again, I think it's good. I think it's great. I'm all for like getting, you know, outsiders' perspectives. The issue is, and I don't think this has anything to do with him being a fire inspector, but Whorf is so enamored, who wouldn't be, by this beautiful, wonderful language, and that he sort of picks up this idea, this question of what does this have to say about the Hopi culture, and runs with it. So much so that he starts becoming very deterministic in his view of it. For Whorf, it's not so much that it's really not that the Hopi language encodes the Hopi culture, which again I agree with. What he says is no, the Hopi language like produces the Hopi culture almost. This very deterministic kind of like input output kind of view of how a language and a culture work together.
Now that idea to me seems inherently wrong.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that this would be a give and take type situation at best.
At best. But that
right.
idea,
because the culture would determine the language, which might, you know, have a feedback loop with the culture, but it's not. Why would the language develop in a certain way if not for the culture?
Well, and so this amongst linguists online, this has become something of a meme. And there's also the meme of did you know that the Inuit have so many words for snow? And then you just start face palming. You're like, oh Lord. Yeah, because they live around snow. And if you live around snow, you're going to have a lot of different words for different types of snow. Does that mean that Inuit people, who are also awesome, are like inherently better at snow? Well, of course they're better at snow. Is that because of their language? No, they live around snow and they have to survive in snow. So they have different words for different types of snow. I mean, if you're a skier, even speaking in English, which has far fewer words for snow, skiers and snowboarders have all kinds of like specific terminology.
Yeah, sick pow, bro.
Yeah, exactly. And now I don't ski, so I don't know that word. But I'm like, okay, well, is it your words for powder, bro, that are determining your view of the powder, or is it because you ski on top of the powder that you have words for the different types of snow? I mean, you see what I'm going with here. Like, it gets kind of like this weird idea, but that weird idea, as I've again in a very biased fashion, but I'm attempting to give both sides of the argument, is essentially the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. And so Sapir goes, or rather Whorf, really it's Whorf, using Sapir's work, goes even further. There is a great article, and unfortunately I don't think it's up for like public consumption. Maybe you could find it somewhere. Back in the 80s.
I am a research wizard in a little bit.
I have some friends who help me out with JSTOR and things like that. Shout out to my friends who probably want to stay anonymous. That's fine.
That makes sense.
Yeah, Frank Heynick, who was Dutch, I believe, and he wrote an article in the journal Semiotica back in the 80s, in 1983, called, and I did email this to you if you just want to put up, like, if you want to put it.
Also, I want to, some of these questions are pretty interesting.
Okay,
so
yeah, you do that.
Just because we're about to move into another topic, so ask these questions, then we'll move in. There is a paper that claims that the invention of recursive syntax in language caused a cultural revolution that led to modernism 50 to 60,000 years ago. Does this relate to the topic today?
This is an expanded form of Whorfianism. Yeah, this is like Whorfianism dialed up to the thousandth power. I mean, I'm not going to scoff, but I'm going to go, yeah, I don't know how you'd prove that.
Okay.
I need to read the paper, but I'd be like, yeah, I don't know how I would want to see how they actually, I am not a Cherokee expert.
So the question is, what does he think about Donald Yates' work on the Cherokee? I'm also not familiar with this. This is most of my knowledge is Northeastern Native Americans. We got the Haudenosaunee, Eastern Algonquins. And that's most of it, and a little bit of other eastern woodlands, but which does include the Cherokee, who are related.
Yeah, Iroquoian, right? Yeah.
Iroquoian, which is related to the Haudenosaunee, who are the Iroquois. But like, it's I don't know. Also hilarious from Rex. Skiers and my friends have very different meanings for the word powder.
I know. Osio. That's what I know. I lived in Oklahoma for a little bit, so I learned that word in Cherokee. Osio. Hello.
Yeah. Thank you for the donation, Blue Frost. You are very, very generous. Also, thank you for supporting the Patreon in a very generous way, because it only requires $2 a month, and you give me 20, which is incredibly generous. So, and thank you for the more donation, which is entirely unnecessary, by the way. I appreciate everybody who doesn't donate anything, and also people who do donate. It allows me to keep doing this. But please like the video if you're interested. Patreon down below, $2 a month, early unedited episodes, a little bit of extra content, working on more on there, and it'll eventually go on to $5 a month. But we're now going to talk about Einstein to Whorf, this article that you have sent me.
Yes. So this is a fascinating and well-written article. And so Frank Heynick, who I believe was Dutch, is Dutch. I think he's still alive. I don't know exactly. He makes a pretty convincing argument in this article that he neither argues for or against Whorf. What he's trying to do is look at the influence of Einstein's theory of relativity on the entirety of academia in the early 20th century and how it trickled into fields that have absolutely nothing to do with physics, such as linguistics.
Right, because just so we're clear here, the theory of relativity is about physics, but often what happens in any type of culture is that when there's an idea that, especially a very popular idea that's in people's minds, that idea is then going, it kind of goes into your brain and it can affect other ideas. Like, for example, another example I like to think about is the idea of the Big Bang has a lot of things inside of it that point to the beginning of Genesis, which, you know, you can't prove that, but it's a little strange that this allegedly scientific theory seems to have traits from like a I'm going to say the word myth here, but I don't mean that it's fake. What I mean is that it's a cultural mythos. It's a story that affects the way we think. So
I'm a Tolkien
underlying
bro.
beliefs.
I'm a Tolkien bro. So yeah, I mean, when people say like, "Yeah, Christianity's a myth," I'm like, "Yes, thank you. That's such a compliment. Thank you."
Right.
Yeah, of course
it's very important.
Yeah, of course it's a myth. Myth doesn't mean it's wrong or fake. What the hell? People just don't get what words mean. Anyhow, I'll leave that. That's a bugbear for another day. I hate when people misuse the term myth.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm certain you get the same thing with anthropology. But it's just a myth. So it does really seem like Einstein's theory of relativity, which really had nothing to do with language, was so influential that it really does seem that everyone wanted to jump on the relativity bandwagon. And it seems that it pushed Whorf to kind of double, triple, quadruple down on this theory. And again, every time he does this, it gets more and more, if I can use a term the kids say, cringe, because he starts getting further and further away from any sort of like reasonable understanding of interplay between language and culture. And I don't mean that you do not have to be a pointy-headed academic to understand that the idea that the language you speak dictates the way you think is kind of a strange idea. Obviously, culture does dictate the way you think. How is culture spread forward in time and across space? Via language. So of course there's a connection. But again, to go back to the whole, well, why do the Inuit have so many words for snow business? I'm like, well, where are they living? What are they doing? John McWhorter, Professor John McWhorter at Columbia University has this point about, like, he has this joke that's like, tribe that doesn't have a written language is notoriously bad at spelling. Like,
really? What a great idea.
Yeah,
how innovative.
They don't have a written language, so then they spell poorly. This must be because their language does, or I think he has another one too that's like a tribe that doesn't a tribe that lives in an isolated village in the Amazon is really bad at driving cars. It must be their language because they don't have a word for car in their language. Or maybe they just don't have need for cars because they're in the jungle, and so maybe their language doesn't reflect that. I don't know. Is that more reasonable? I think probably, right? And obviously that's kind of a meme version of a meme, and maybe a mean, but it's more of a meme version of Whorfianism. But I think it gets to the point, right? It's like, come on. I mean, at some point you start running into you go down really weird thought paths pretty quickly if you really like take a big hit on the doobie of Whorfianism, because it has some strange implications. Again, a little bit of Dennis from Always Sunny. Like, the implication is kind of odd that like it gets very quickly into the zone of like, again, this is I don't think this, so don't take this out of context. It gets to this idea of quote unquote the brown people are so magical, they think different than we, the white anthropologists, do. And look at how quaint and magical they are. It must be their language.
Right. Right.
Not the fact that they've lived in a completely different environment and are perhaps
Right.
more isolated.
And
That has nothing to
subsistence
do with it.
strategy, which
It's
is
the
huge.
language.
Yeah. I just real quick, I want to address this. The squirrel from Ice Age is talking shit to me right now. High word count and low information transfer. Bye. Listen, guys, everybody who's here, I know a lot of regulars in the comments. This is a long format thing, right? I do a little bit of shorter content. I do some threads as well as some short form videos. Going to do more of those. We're here to hang out. We're here to have in depth. We're doing depth, not breadth. Okay, so there is a place for being concise. This isn't it.
And I'm not your man for being concise either. So,
exactly. Yeah. And my writing is sometimes, but look, I get it. I totally understand this this criticism here, but people know what they're getting into here. This is what we're here for. So
well, it was probably if I can push back a little, it was probably his language was just somewhat reduced, so he couldn't handle it.
Exactly, that's what it is.
Yeah, the words were too many, and so his language constrained him. And anyhow, I'm mean. But if you're gonna shitpost, I'll shitpost right back. Anyhow, I know. I'll
Michigan biker is mad as well. Bye, everybody. Bye. Have a beautiful time. Yeah. Go ahead. We're gonna keep having this long form conversation. Bye. Leave. It's okay.
Michigan biker, can you signal your intention to turn first? Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyhow, so yeah. I'll put my shield wall up around all my friends. Yeah. All right. Anyhow. Yeah.
Oh, Michigan. I'm sorry. We shouldn't have been making fun of him. He was saying bye to the squirrel, not to us. I'm so sorry, Michigan biker.
You signal your intention to turn. You're one of the good ones. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Don't let the door hit you. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Always one window liquor. Okay, let's continue. Right. I'm sorry, Michigan biker. I apologize, man. I didn't mean to. Love you too, bro. Thank you for being here. Yeah, now let's continue with the topic at hand.
All right. Yeah, sorry, that's my Scotch-Irish genetic heritage there. You do not mess with my friends. Okay. Yeah, so it just goes down weird thought paths of well, if language constrains thought, then does that mean that if somebody's language doesn't possess one little particular thing, does that mean that whole group of people is bad at doing that one thing, right? So for example, Chinese is notable for not really having tenses per se on their verbs. They use other words to let you know when an action happens. Which is totally fine. Many such cases, many languages around the world do that. You actually don't need present and past tense on verbs, right? You don't actually need that to make sense of the world around you. You can talk about the world in a different way. You can have a different linguistic strategy. Okay, great. Does that mean that Chinese speakers are bad at telling time? You see how this idea gets kind of weird really quickly. It gets dumb. You're why wouldn't they be good at telling time? They can see the sun pass through the sky and can look at a watch, and just like everyone else on planet Earth can. What are you talking about? Well, their language doesn't. Okay, let's be careful here, right? Let's be really careful, because we get down into strange and kind of dumb conclusions if we take this idea too strongly. And you could say, maybe I am this is a caricature of Whorfianism. Fine, I warned you in the beginning, but okay, maybe I'm being overly harsh. Maybe this isn't what Whorf quote unquote meant. So let's look at some things that he said about the Hopi. Let's go to the source. Let's see what he had to say, because it gets weird really quickly.
Like this one.
Page 47 is an even better one. Again, Frank Heynick was very nice and wrote a very good article and pulled out some doozies of quotes from Whorf. Okay, so this is Whorf speaking about the relationship between quote unquote Western languages, whatever that means, and Hopi. So he says, we Western. I'll read this aloud, I guess, because this is audio. Audio is along with visual. I'll just read it if that's okay.
Yeah.
We Westerners are constantly reading into nature fictional acting entities simply because our verbs must have substantives in front of them. I'll break down what this means after I'm done reading it. We have to say, quote unquote, it flashed, or quote unquote, a light flashed, setting up an actor quote unquote it, or quote unquote light, to perform what we call an action, quote unquote, to flash. Yet the flashing and the light are one and the same. The Hopi language reports the flash with a single verb, which I'll mispronounce, repi, I guess, which means
I can't even. Where is this on the page? I can't
page
even find it.
47 to 48. At the bottom of 47 into 48. Yeah, right.
Got
there.
it. Okay, and sorry for 5 seconds of not that. I'll bring up Subway Surfers to keep these mentally challenged children engaged in a little bit.
Okay. The Hopi language reports the flash with a single verb, repi, a flash occurred, or flash occurred, something like that. There is no division into subject and predicate, not even like a suffix like T of Latin tonat, it thunders. He also completely, this shows me, I wonder what his knowledge of Latin is here, because I think he's misparsed that somewhat. But anyhow, Hopi canon does have verbs without subjects, a fact which may give that tongue potentialities, probably never to be developed as a logical system for understanding some aspects of the universe, exclamation mark in the original. Okay, so he's clearly taken by...
They use exclamation points in
the
academic
original.
papers?
Yeah, well, you used to.
Used to, right.
Used to. So, okay, again, I'm being harsh, but I don't have hatred for Whorf, because he did some really good stuff, and he's clearly taken by Hopi, and I understand what that's like to be excited about a language. I'm obviously excited about languages right now. And I think, it's a beautiful tongue that I sadly will never have time to learn. It's great. I get it, right? And he's actually, I think Whorf comes to this from a good place. He's trying to show that, hey, indigenous and particularly non-Western languages are really worthy of study. We as Western linguists should look into them. We should value them. We can learn a lot from them. I think all of those things are true. I think the problem is he gets so excited that he just starts jumping off into the void a little bit, and then starts acting like he's proven his point. And that is kind of effectively what happened. People were like, well, Whorf has proven this, and that's why this idea still percolates throughout like academic culture. The only people who really are willing to critique it are linguists, because linguists are the ones who think through all of the implications of what it means if your language really does determine your thought patterns.
And people don't listen to linguists, just so we're clear. In academia, not as much.
Why would they? Linguists are notoriously bad. We are notoriously bad at talking about language, which is hilarious.
Yeah. The guest is Doc Brown, who is a linguist, as well as so your PhD is not in linguistics, right? MA in linguistics, and then I'm
really more of a philologist, but yeah,
right.
Yeah, I've done linguistic fieldwork in 2 countries. I've written about the development of grammatical gender in Scandinavian languages, so I do have some linguistic chops. Somebody had an OU in their thing. That's fine. I'll allow it. OU, really? Okay.
OU? Where's that?
Okay. All right.
I don't even know where that's
later,
from.
I guess. Anyhow, sorry.
I don't know where you're talking about.
Horns. Anyhow, this is my UT indoctrination have to come out.
I see. Yeah, enchiladas in the profile picture. Yeah. Doc Brown.
This is just football rivalry. Sorry. Okay.
And also, everybody can Doc Brown on Twitter. You can find him down below in the description.
Yeah. Okay. So essentially, if I can digest this, because this is straight from the fire hose of Whorf, and he's using some fancy, quote unquote, fancy meaning like pointy headed autistic linguistic terms here. What essentially Whorf is saying is, we in the West, meaning speakers particularly of English, but let's say any Indo-European language as spoken in Europe, we in the West, we require nouns to talk about the world around us, and the Hopi don't need to have nouns. They can just use verbs. They're totally different than us, and because they use verbs to talk about so many things, they are more clued into time and space and how occurrences happen.
No, that doesn't make any sense.
So for sure, Hopi language requires the speakers of the language, like the grammar, the syntax of Hopi requires you as a speaker to go through all kinds of complex sort of mental calculations about how exactly you're going to form your verb to talk about what is happening. But that doesn't mean that the Hopi, innately, because of their language, view time and space differently. Do indigenous cultures view time and space differently? Of course, because of their culture and their history being quite different from European culture and history. But it's not like the language makes it this way. The language reflects the history and culture of that people. But he's saying here that, like, and also particularly at the end of this quote, that like, oh, if we as Westerners can only understand Hopi better, maybe we can understand the universe better. Because
Oh my gosh, I did not realize it went this deep. That is insane.
it is a little insane. And again, I think he's coming to it from a good place, but he's just going off the rails on a crazy train with Ozzy. I mean, what's happening? Like, that does not follow. I mean, this is, and this also does show you that this is This is it from an era. This is from the 40s, early 40s. Big science is really big. Capital
Right.
B, capital S. The bomb. People are starting to think about making a bomb that could destroy cities. Big science. And like the theory of everything. We need to have a theory of everything. We need to have and maybe if we just discover, like, well, we've learned, we're getting close to really learning how to split atoms here. Maybe if we split apart the Hopi language, we'll discover things about the universe.
Right. The key to the universe is in a desert Native American language. Yes, of course it is.
I mean, I think the key to the Hopi culture is found inside their language, but I don't think the language, again, the language reflects their culture. Why wouldn't it? But that is not the, I've actually heard, I'm not saying you, some people have come back at me with this before in debates, and they're like, yeah, but don't you think the language reflects the culture? I'm like, I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm saying it does. What you're saying is that the language prescribes the culture, which is
ridiculous.
Because it also, Whorf doesn't really, at least from what I could gather, doesn't really ever deal with the issue of the question of what happens if you learn another language. What if you learn another language? Are all of a sudden you seeing the world differently? I mean, or
language has a non-zero impact on cognitive processes and brain development, though. I hope you don't totally reject this.
No, that actually is that connects to what I'm saying. Is like,
right. I agree.
Yeah,
I agree with that as well.
Yeah.
Non-zero, but not to the point of what Whorf is making.
Yeah.
In the specific hypothesis.
It does. Right. But it's not like, okay, so they've done studies. They have done studies. They've done studies where they send little monolingual children in and have them in various countries, and they have them do like little complex tasks wherein like they're attempting to, like, colors are a thing that, so not all languages have the same kind of color system. Color is very subjective just in general, like like neurologic, like the way your brain recognizes color is very subjective. I'm partially colorblind, so I know this like from experience. I literally have to have my wife tell me sometimes what colors, like what color is this, because I can't see certain color spectrum. It's not really bad. I can still drive. I know red light, green light kind of stuff, but it's there. So I feel that, okay. And so different languages, regardless of your level, regardless of whether how screwed up your rods and combs are in your eyes, you know, languages do encode color differently across language. This is true. And so they've run various monolingual children through, through well-designed, non-bad, not unethical, totally ethical experiments where with toys and like, what color is this toy, what color is that toy, trying to get kids to see if there's a difference in how quickly they can determine what color the toy is. It's like maybe like a few nanoseconds different.
There's also been extensive work on like something like the Inuit and their perception of understanding cardinal directions, which is encoded in their language, but it also is from the culture.
I think it's the Gugu Yamathur. Oh my gosh, I should know that. I am not an expert in Aboriginal Australian languages. I think it's that language.
Neither am I.
Don't quote me, because there are certain Aboriginal Australian languages that don't have words for right and left. They have cardinal directions, and so there is no such thing as right or left. Your right or left will change based on your position, on your orientation. Which
would make sense. I don't know if the Inuit don't have the word, but they definitely care more about cardinal directions than they do about relative directions, like right and left. And it would make sense to me if you're in the desert for something similar.
Your language is making you make these kinds of distinctions. Of course, you're going to be more aware of it. Right. But you find an English speaker who lives in a similar environment, who has to constantly know cardinal directions, like maybe a sailor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, maybe a
Right.
sailor. Fine, you have a compass. Let's say you put. This is what I'd say. Like this is all hypothetical. So let me just put out another hypothetical. You find English speakers and you put them on a grassy plain area, and you make them have to live like Aboriginal Australians traditionally would have lived. They will also know cardinal directions pretty quickly,
Right.
and their language will not encode it. So I mean, there's words for them north, south, east, west, but you'll still retain the words for right and left. It's like, yeah, okay, of course, if your language makes you do something, you have to do it a little quicker. But the human brain is so fast at making these kinds of calculations. It's like, okay, it takes a few nanoseconds longer, or maybe even a second longer for somebody to make some sort of, to say something. And so maybe, maybe your language does have the world's tiniest impact on how you think. But that's not accounting for what Whorf is trying to argue here. It's not like you're understanding aspects of the universe differently.
Linguistic determinism is in the language is determining the culture in a much more extensive way.
Yeah.
And another example is that like there was this study done on London taxi drivers that showed that a certain part of their brain, because they were memorizing maps, like they know wherever it is in the city. They actually have to take a really difficult exam to become a London taxi driver. As well as just scientists have also looked at, like, we use GPS and that kind of destroys our ability to navigate in a lot of ways, at least less than people in the past who didn't have GPS.
Yeah.
I'm still here.
So is that because of our language? Did our language do that? Or did technology percolating through the culture do that? Oh, GPS percolating through, I actually need to look into. No, I need to look.
So you
into
don't know about Barry Fall, Randall?
I am not,
he doesn't know.
Yeah,
but
sorry.
continue.
I do not know everything.
You want.
I do not know everything. Again, this is why I don't get along well with other academics, because I'm willing to say, yeah, I don't know that.
Very rare.
I know that. Yeah.
I remember my sister asked me some question about science one time, and it was something about science. She asked me this question. I was like, I don't know anything about that, and she was like, what? It's like, I don't know anything about that. What do you mean? And she's like, I thought you knew everything. I'm like, why did you think that? I never claimed that.
In academic circles, if you claim to not know something, people will say, well, your ideas must clearly be wrong then. I'm like, well, hold on. Yeah. As the meme says, what, you're a linguist? Why can't you speak all languages? It's like,
name 400 languages. Yeah. Name every language.
Yeah, name every language. Okay. No, so anywho, I do think this, actually, if we have a little time, I can talk about good stuff that Whorf did. Whorf actually had a really cool ideas and that are legit and do hold. It's just that he's remembered for like his absolute worst idea, and it's kind of a shame. Like
the simplest ideas often get the most attention.
Yeah, it's sad, because actually Whorf did a lot of good stuff, as did Sapir. Even though Sapir was boning Margaret Mead for a little while, which was interesting.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so I don't know. That ties back into your Mead thing that you did. So
right, that was a long time ago. If anyone remembers, Margaret Mead, who was lied to by her. Margaret Mead is a culture anthropologist, and she was lied to by her Samoan subjects, and this was repeated in a very popular book that she published, and is still believed by a lot today. Even though the people in Samoa that she learned from are on record on video saying, no, this isn't true, we lied to her. Like, that's it. And it's in this best-selling book. Seriously.
Samoans.
They were like teenage girls is the thing.
Yeah.
But that's not the subject of today.
Girls.
So
yeah, of course. Yeah. Like, it's so fetch. Yeah. Anyhow. Yeah.
Stop trying to make Samoan free love happen.
Yeah, I have great love for Pacific Islanders. So yeah, base Samoans.
Me too.
Anthropologists. Yeah,
obviously. Going back there in 2 weeks, I'll be in Hawaii. So my grind will be off for about a week while I recharge with the ocean.
You know how you get your grind back on point, right?
Mm.
You got to eat the kind grinds. That was a Hawaiian pigeon joke. Anyhow, you got to eat the.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyhow, yeah. Maybe there's Hawaiian listeners who get that. Okay.
I hope so.
Yeah. Grinds being food. Yeah. So in pigeon English. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is, again, Whorf actually had some really great ideas. and which we probably don't really have time to get into. So I don't want to make it seem like he was all bad. It's just that he is remembered for his worst idea. And I think there's something tragic in that. Like, I hope and pray that if any of my ideas academically or otherwise are remembered, I have like great fear of this, that like my absolute worst ideas will be remembered. I really hope and pray that doesn't happen. And if it does happen, I hope some autist later on will go on a podcast or whatever they have in the future, Braincast, and be like, here's the thing. So Brown was clearly right about this, but wrong. I would want somebody to do this, right? Like, I would, please. Yeah, because and again, I can in this quote in particular, like the fact that he uses an exclamation mark, he clearly loves this stuff. I mean, I think that's good.
Who could blame him?
Yeah, it's awesome. It is awesome. But, you know, so if I can talk a little bit about the difference between nouns and verbs. So
you know patois. We have a Turkish man who has grown up partly in the UK telling us that he knows patois, which is the strangest thing I've ever heard. But
that is
Bombaklat. Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, you know, different languages have different kind of strategies, let's say, for talking about the world. And if you're a monolingual person, this is really, you can get this kind of in theory, but not in actuality, because you've never had to deal with it. But like, you know, for example, I talk about the Philippines. So I have my family's in Philippines and speaks Bisaya, or it's also sometimes called Cebuano, but Bisaya.
Oh, Cebuano I've heard of.
Well, Bisaya is a dialect of Cebuano, or vice versa. So it's kind of a, there's something of a cultural, Cebuano is Bisaya as spoken on the island of Cebu. How about that?
Yes.
But Bisaya is an important lingua franca for the entire southern part of the Philippines. It's basically what different cultural groups in the southern part of the Philippines use to talk to each other. If it's not English, it's going to be Bisaya.
Shout out to Cactus Mapping, I'm assuming on Instagram, for this language map of the Philippines.
It's more, you know, it's fine. That's fine. There's more individual barriers, but it's a good kind of it's a good kind of general way of viewing language families, at least in the Philippines. There's more of them out there than that. Yeah, there are more. There's a lot more. Yeah. So Bisaya, like, so this is definitely true for Bisaya. It's definitely true for Tagalog, and I'm gonna say I think it's actually true. Yeah, it's true for all Philippine languages, and also languages like related languages like Indonesian and Malay,
which are basically the same language, but yes,
the same thing. Yeah. There is no, so, well, I'll speak only, well, I'll put a pit. I'm not going to speak for Indonesian because I don't know it as well as I think I do. But for like in Bisaya, that there's no such thing as verb tense. There's no present or past. So then that begs the question, oh my gosh, do Filipinos can't tell time? Right. Oh my gosh, like, look at how quaint these, again, they're my family, so I can talk about these quaint brown people are. They're so stupid. They need an American to come in and teach them to tell time. I'm like, okay, so there is such thing as island time, but island time is a cultural thing. It has nothing to do with their language. They have smartphones. They have watches. They understand what time is. For Pete's sake, right?
And also, they're culturally known as incredibly hard workers, by the way.
Exactly. Like, it's like, what are you talking about? So, well, Filipino languages don't mark time on their, so they don't have like a go, went. They don't mark verbs like that. Do, did. Okay. They do not mark verbs like that. They do mark verbs for completedness. So is the action completed or ongoing?
That's very interesting.
So you can say, well, in English, see, this is hard because as English speakers and as speakers of European languages, our languages. Oh, maybe the one area where our languages
Spanish
and American.
Yes, Spanish, and then later after the Spanish-American War, American, which is why the Filipinos are so connected to America culturally.
That's why English is the official language of the country.
I didn't know that.
Yep.
I thought it was Tagalog.
Nope. Oh, do not say that. And I have Southern Filipino relatives. So
you got it.
Do not say that. No.
Right. Because Tagalog is only over here.
It's
as
only
well.
Luzon in the upper area. Yeah, the northern part. Yeah. It's no. The Tagalog speakers like to think that they speak the
and that's the part that politically dominates the country as well.
Yes, they're politically dominant, but it's also I'll be careful what I say. I have opinions about the northern. I'm very biased. So but Filipino languages mark completedness. on verbs, not necessarily when it happens. So that's interesting. This is called aspect versus tense. So right, English verbs really we mark aspect, but we don't do it on the verb itself. We usually use like a helping verb. So like the distinction between, although see in English it's tricky because in English we kind of combine tense and aspect and mood all together into one kind of verbal system. This is called the TMA system, tense, mood, aspect. English is sort of a jimble jamble of like a lot of different things happening at once. So it's difficult for, if you're an English speaker, to think of verbs in a way that doesn't have to do with time, but just whether the action is ongoing or finished. Because you can finish actions in the present tense and have ongoing actions in the past tense, right? Theoretically. So that's how at least Bisaya, and I believe every other Filipino language, yes, marks verbs. So, and that's fine, right? Like it is difficult to learn. Geez, it's one of the hardest things to learn if you're trying to learn one of the languages, because as an English speaker, you're not used to thinking of verbs like this. But does that mean, again, that Filipinos are like notoriously bad at telling time? No, it doesn't mean they are. And if their culture has a different sense of time, which it totally does, that's a cultural thing, man. That doesn't mean that like the language itself is somehow determining this. That's crazy. We don't, yeah. Okay. So in Polish, right? So you don't have words for twice or thrice. So you're bad at telling how many times something happened. You see how dumb that is? You just say 2 times or 3 times, right? This is a great, thank you, Ironheart. This is a great example. Languages, if they don't have one thing, they'll just find another way to say the same thing in a different construction with different words and or syntax. Like, because ultimately, as different as humans are, and we are very different, and as much as culture does play a role in how we think, it does, there are some sort of just general human experiences, right? And languages do need to be able to talk about those. If your language isn't capable of talking about one times, 2 times, 3 times, it's going to be difficult to talk about how many times you need to, like, I don't know, cut the onion before you throw it in the pan, right? Like these are just things that, and you can say once or twice or thrice, or you could say 2 times, 3 times. There's other languages have other ways of dealing with this. It's fine. There's just different strategies to the more or less the same ends. Again, I bring up the Filipino example just because it's something that's near and dear to my heart, and it's an example of a language that doesn't mark time at all. It marks completion on verbs. So if we take Whorf at his word about Hopi, and if we're going to be consistent, and we should try to be consistent, then that also has to mean that the Filipinos are bad at telling time. And linguists don't like saying things like that because that's a ridiculous idea. When I throw, not to you, but to other, particularly anthro-cultural studies people, they really don't like hearing this because then they don't like being lumped in with a colonial mindset. And I'm like, well, regardless of your opinion on colonialism, Whorf might be having some colonial mindset here with his quaint brown people ideas. And I'm like, so yeah. Right? Like, and if you're going to have it one way, then you kind of have to have it the other way, right? Like, to be consistent, and linguistics should attempt to be, as obviously human languages are chaotic. So in the swimming chaos of human language, we should attempt to find some consistent ways of talking about them. And if this is true, then it kind of has to just be true, right? And you could say, well, maybe it's true just for the Hopi, but then why is it only true just for the Hopi? Is it because they're Native Americans and have a different cultural understanding? I think that would probably be why Whorf is pointing them out as like, look at this really cool way of viewing time, which again is great. Cultures do view time quite differently, but is it the language that's making them do that? I don't know. Anyhow, maybe I'm probably making my point too many times here, but again, I'm swimming upstream. Like I have to swim upstream here because so many people, and it's not their fault, are just taught this idea. Largely like by me, literally by me, progressive adjacent people,
or literally to me, rather.
Yeah, it's not their fault, but it's just like this doesn't follow. Like this is not a convincing argument. And again, I'm very biased. And if you're a Whorfian, I love you. No hard feelings, but it's just like, come on, folks. Anyhow, so yeah. Whorf did some great stuff though. Like Whorf did great work on phonology, on sound systems. He's credited with, so his mentor Edward Sapir, it basically popularizes and cements the idea of a phoneme and then Whorf, his sort of follower.
Phoneme being a like
an
like
irreducible
little sounds, like
an
syllables, but even more. Sorry, go.
an irreducible sound within a language's sound inventory, something like
Right.
that. A core sound unit.
Phonemes make up words.
Well, hold on. So
Okay.
phonemes are the underlying representation of words. Allophones are their surface level representations. So Sapir was big on phonemes. That's good because they are real. You can prove this. And Whorf was big on allophones, which is good because you can prove that. So those are big contributions to linguistics right there. And I don't know why those aren't what they're really more remembered for, because it's that's actually more of a real good and provable, verifiable kind of linguistic discoveries. Whorf also had this idea of a cryptotype, which is an awesome word. If I can send this to you if you want, or you could find it too. Let me just send it to you in the.
Yeah.
Cryptotype. Yeah, cryptotype is basically something that is not stated but implied in the language. Again, to bring it back to Always Sunny, the implication. So sometimes things aren't overtly stated in a utterance in a language, but they're still there. An example that I can think of. I'm trying to think of an example in English. I'm trying to think.
That's all right.
Something like, well, it's maybe not the world's greatest example. I'm trying to think of, again, examples off the top of my head. I probably should have thought of this a little bit more, but I was busy. Yeah.
That's okay.
So like, again, English is kind of hard because our language doesn't mark a lot of things that some other languages do. We have a relatively simple language. It doesn't feel like it some days, believe me, but we actually, as hard as English is, we also have we're weirdly streamlined.
And wait, to be clear, English is not a language. It's like 14 languages in a trench coat.
It's 3 languages in a trench coat, basically. Yeah,
right. 3.
And
yeah.
if you would deign me to have me back, if you would deign to have me back on, we could talk. That has to do with Vikings. This is connected to that Viking thing. But like, let's say, Ralph and I wanted to go to the store and then get some coffee. So that latter part, that latter clause, and then get some coffee. Who? Oh, me and Ralph and I. So we've introduced.
That sentence sounds weird. Maybe just because I'm repeating it in my head, but it sounds very weird.
Well, but it's an off the cuff example sentence. My point is that like for the first clause of the sentence, we say Ralph and I. So that's the subjects, the doers of the verb, but we don't need to repeat Ralph and I in the second part of the sentence. It's implied, right? Or you could say, or even let's pick a better example would be something like, Ralph and I wanted to go to the store, and then person B says, and get some coffee? Yeah, and get some coffee. Yeah, and get some coffee. Who? Oh, Ralph and I. It had already been established in the discourse. And so there's things. So again, that's not a great example for English because English doesn't mark a lot of stuff overtly. But in other languages like Hopi, there's all kinds of marking on the verbs themselves that lets you know that something's going on, even if you don't say it. And even if it's not marked, that's the cryptotype. It's still sort of there right under the surface. And it makes sense when you replay the conversation, right? Because in the Ralph and I example, it was Ralph and I we were talking about the whole time. If this is making sense. And
right.
Yeah, and get some coffee. Who?
Yeah.
Ralph and I. It had already been established. So it was implied, even though it wasn't overtly stated, people still can make sense of that exchange in English because it's in the context of an entire sort of discourse, basically. So anyhow, that's awesome. That's an awesome idea. And that does run through all, like, linguistics took that and ran with it, and it is good. I mean, it holds. Whorf is doing some really good work. And again, Sapir is out there recording languages that are dying. There's languages that the only reason we really have records of is because of people like Sapir out there going and recording stuff. So again, I'm not trying to hate on all of the stuff these guys ever did. It's a shame that they're remembered for the weirdest idea they had. And I don't know what that is. If that's just like, you could speak more to that than I can. Anthropology loves magical indigenous people, quote unquote magical indigenous.
Yes. And I love them as well. I just don't think they're magical. I treat them as people, which makes me a racist or something. Yeah.
Yeah. As actual humans.
Wow, what a crazy idea that the
Their
humans are
own
humans.
cultural history and way of doing. Yeah, I don't know. I, I mean, all I got. So I actually have some. I'm gonna shout. I won't shout them out by name, but they do sometimes watch this. I work a part-time job that's a non-academic job, and I actually work with some. I have a pretty high amount of Indigenous, Native American, and First Nations Canadian coworkers.
You have coworkers that are indigenous that
Yeah,
watch my podcast?
yeah. I've been sending
That's
them the thing. So,
incredible. That's awesome.
so shout out to Juan if you're watching. Juan, hello.
Did they watch my interview with the Ojibwe guy?
I need to send that to them. I need to send
Okay.
So for this whole so leading up to this episode, I was telling them on like when it was slow at work about like what I'm prepping, and they're like, "Wait, what did he say about Indigenous people?" I'm like, "Oh, it gets weird really quickly." So I'm like, over the course of 2 shifts, I was just telling.
Wait,
them
not me, Whorf.
Yeah, not you. Yeah, about
Oh,
Whorf.
okay,
Yeah,
cool.
not you. Yeah, about talking about how bad, like weird and crazy Whorf is. And I was like, yeah, he basically said that like Indigenous people have a hard time telling time, like Westerners do. And they're like, that is hilarious and racist. I'm like, it is hilarious and racist. And
Yeah.
it obviously is completely wrong. Like, and so it's just like I actually, and so if I can tie it up with this, the bow. So I actually, one of my coworkers is Cayuget from Vancouver Island. And
Yeah.
the Cayuget are
Wait, is that different than the Cayuga?
Yes.
Which are
Haudenosaunee. Very
Haudenosaunee.
different. Very different.
Okay, okay. Cayuget. I've never heard of them.
The Cayuget are they mostly speak English now, sadly, but are historically Nuu-chah-nulth speaking people.
How do you spell Cayuget?
Let me just send you the language thing because
Okay.
the Cayuget is like my understanding is they're one group that speaks. So you had different tribes that spoke similar languages sometimes.
Right,
This was
of
often
course.
like Americans versus Brits, right? Like we both speak the same language, so it's like, but are we different peoples? Yes, but we speak the same language. It's a complex interplay again between language and culture, right? And politics there.
Right, which is not always tied to ethnicity, as anthropology in the past very much thought.
Yeah, they had some, well, because they were influenced by Herder, which is another topic we could talk about, why the Germans ruined anthropology. Yes, I said it.
Okay.
The Germans
Big
ruined
claim.
anthropology. Yeah. Don't trust the Germans are crazy. I love them, but man. Anyhow, so the Cayuget are traditionally a Nuu-chah-nulth speaking people. Nuu-chah-nulth, I just sent you the wiki link to Nuu-chah-nulth. It's it's a Wakashan language. Wakashan languages are historically spoken on Vancouver Island, which is a gigantic island. People don't realize how big that thing is.
It's very big.
And then a little bit at Cape Flattery. So you have the Makah. So the Makah nation does some people still do, and they're trying to revive it. The Makah language is an American indigenous language. Nuu-chah-nulth is a First Nations Canadian indigenous language. They're different languages. They are related. They're across the water from each other. Okay, so Nuu-chah-nulth is obviously a really fascinating and complex and super intense to learn language. It does not run like anything you've encountered if you've only learned European or even Asian languages. It's a whole new world, as the song says. It's like it requires you to do things that are very complex. Okay, so it's formally called Nuu-chah. So sometimes you hear this. Nuu-chah was sort of how Sapir and Whorf were referring to it.
This like that Nuu-chah, like these words remind me of some Tlingit words that I know. Like there was this shaman named Snownuke.
Yeah.
It sounds very similar, but sorry, digression.
Well, that's to bring it back to our discussion of linguistic areas and Sprachbünde. That's because even though Tlingit and Nuu-chah-nulth are not related, they are part of the same area, and they shared a lot of sounds. The languages shared sounds back,
but separate language families.
Separate language families sharing sounds and some features because of absolute centuries of like time-depth centuries of sharing like a common environment, and then also cultural interaction. Of course, there's cultural interaction.
And by cultural interaction, the Nuu-chah-nulth, I'm probably mispronouncing that.
I am also mispronouncing it. So yeah.
They were likely raided by the Haida and the Tlingit, unfortunately.
I can't speak. I believe the Haida raided many different people in and up and around Vancouver Island. It would not surprise me if the Nuu-chah-nulth were also. I can't speak to that because go check out Haida histories. I don't know. I look into that somebody because it's not. Yeah, I can't speak to that. But it would not surprise me if they were raided by the Haida. Let's say that.
Yeah, and the Haida, by the way, we've talked about them before, but they're often called the Vikings of North America, which is why I referred to the Vikings as the Haida of Europe, which is something we did on a live stream earlier. I think that's funny, but they were slavers and raiders, and they're interesting because there are very few people who in North America, not Central America, but North America, practice slavery pre-European colonization, which is tied in a lot with their subsistence strategy and their, like, a lot of them being hunter-gatherers and horticulturalists as opposed to agriculturalist societies, which much more often have slavery.
Yeah. Yeah, sadly, slavery is a pretty ancient institution, shared by many cultures. Sadly, quite sadly, and it still happens today. Quite sadly,
a lot. Yeah.
We call it something else, and we make ourselves feel better about the fact that it still exists.
There's actually more slaves today than there were at any point in history, but that's in absolute numbers.
True, very true. Do not. I'm going to be brave and say I don't like slavery. So I'm going to be really.
Oh wow, hot takes here on the Illegitimate Scholar channel, guys.
So the Nuu-chah-nulth, formerly referred to as Nuu-chah, and that's the term that both Whorf and Sapir use. So Sapir did work amongst the Nuu-chah-nulth speaking peoples. I do not know which groups, but he worked on this language. And so Whorf picks up again. I don't know if Whorf was actually out in Vancouver Island, on Vancouver Island doing this. I can't speak to that. I want to say maybe not, but maybe he did. But if he did go out to Vancouver Island and did learn Nuu-chah-nulth and did speak to Nuu-chah-nulth speaking people, he clearly misunderstood it because to get one last dig in, not so much on Whorf, but on his theory. He claimed that wow, the Hopi have so many verbs, they must understand verb motion better than we do. But you know,
the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis would say that.
Yeah, but if you want to, back on the Frank Heynick article on page 50, Whorf claimed, and this is a bananas claim. I laughed aloud when I read this. I think actually, he claimed that the Nuu-chah-nulth language, quote unquote, doesn't have nouns.
Oh.
There are no nouns in the language. Everything is a verb. So that's quite a claim.
Huh. That's very interesting.
Quite a claim.
How?
Yeah, I'm actually going to be going down that particular rabbit hole next because I don't know how he came to this conclusion. So, I mean, I'm not a Nuu-chah-nulth.
Right. Good question here. And by the way, Ironheart, hey, slave is our word. You non-Slavs. Ironheart is Polish, and the word Slav is very likely from, or slave, like in the English language, comes from Slav, likely, as they were enslaved by a lot of people. But he's asking, are there names verbs? And I have the same question.
This is going to be my next rabbit hole because I actually want to know, because that's such a crazy claim. So I will say some caveats, and then I will say why I have strong reservations about this.
Yeah, wait, before you start, I just want to say Rebirth of the World, who will be coming on the podcast this Saturday, and that will then go on the Patreon roundtable of alternative people. Rebirth, follow him on Twitter, man. He's wealth of knowledge on a lot of this stuff, a lot of these different cultures. We'll talk about it on Saturday, man. Looking forward to it. But yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, no. So Whorf basically holds up the Nuu-chah-nulth language as the most extreme form of this, where everything's a verb, and look at it, proves my point correct that the Nuu-chah-nulth speaking peoples view everything as an action, and they don't have verbs, or rather, they don't have nouns. No nouns exist in their language, only verbs. Okay, that's crazy. I mean, maybe I actually think it was pretty common. My understanding is pretty common to have verbs as names. That does happen in cultures, so you can have verbs as names.
It can happen.
Can I pick out a really cringe example of this that actually people might know? It's only because it has to do with Kevin Costner, and people might know it. He dances with the wolf, and then what do they call him? I think in Lakota, right? Dances with wolves. His name is Dances with Wolves. It's a really
and this is common, especially in a lot of Plains Native Americans.
Yeah,
like Running Horse and things like that.
Yeah. So you can have verbs as names. That totally happens. And I don't doubt that Nuu-chah did something like that. That probably is very likely. But and again, I'm not a Nuu-chah-nulth expert, but I went on like a 5-second Google search and I found this, which I can send you. So there's
Mhm.
there's a First Nations community out on Vancouver Island called, which I'm going to butcher the name, so apologies. Tlaoquiat, I think is how it's pronounced. Tlaoquiat, or maybe Tlaoquiat. I think probably would be something like that. And
Well, these are nouns.
yeah, they have a little like, hey, you want to learn more about our language? And again, this is from them. This is for Indigenous people writing about themselves.
And these are pre-European contact words, because I'm seeing grocery store, which obviously
okay, fine,
wouldn't be, but some of them.
Saak for river.
So hot.
I mean, like they're cedar.
So just
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
these now I need to look more into the language about how because this is just translations. Maybe these are all theoretically verbs, but I kind of think it's weird. I'm trying to imagine a language that would have no nouns. I can imagine a language that has a lot more verbs than nouns, because that does happen, but no nouns. How is this even possible? Again, maybe Whorf was right. I kind of am going to seriously
This
doubt.
is actually a good point. Wolves and horse is a noun, even if you're saying running wolf or something like that.
Yeah, well, but what if you're saying dances with wolves? It's a stupid example because that's a stupid movie, but it's
Dances with wolves. Wolves is still a noun, right?
Like dances. What if you had one? Now I'm not going to. So in that movie, it's Lakota, right? And I am not a Lakota expert, so do not quote me on anything I'm saying here. I'm just using this as an example. Okay, I'm hedging an example. Imagine if you had a language, not like, let's imagine we're on the plains and we're hanging out with a Dothraki, but even Dothraki doesn't do this. We're on the plains of some fictitious fictional world, and there's people and there's wolves. Okay, imagine this. And let's say, totally hypothetically, that maybe there is a verb for dancing with wolves.
Oh, okay.
So
I see.
So many indigenous North American languages do something like that. Not exactly like that, but similar to that, where there is just verbs for things that in English is an entire phrase. Somebody brought up Cherokee before. Again, I'm not a Cherokee expert, but I know that Cherokee is notable for doing this. Cherokee has a lot of verbs. Cherokee is a very verb-heavy language. But Cherokee still has nouns. That's the thing, is even in these languages that have lots of verbs, there's still nouns. So I want to say that Whorf is probably also, I can't prove it, but he's probably also wrong about Nuu-chah-nulth as well. I will do some more digging on that. But the point is just that I call all of this into question. This reasoning, Whorf's internal reasoning, is very weird. And, linguists have been spending the past however many decades, 8 decades roughly, something like that, like trying to put his thoughts to the test. And even people who support Whorfianism have had to kind of hedge their bets and become far more careful about how they talk about it, which I respect, even though I disagree with them. But it's weird, like, again, just to say one more time, anthropologists, by and large, take this idea and run with it because it allows, indigenous people to become magical in their mind as opposed to real humans.
Yeah.
And I just think that's a shame. I think it's a shame. So,
it is quite the shame. And they're not anthropologists. This is outside their field, unless they're linguistic anthropologists. So it's totally understandable. But yeah, this was taught to me in a cultural anthropology class by a cultural anthropologist, or maybe an archaeologist. But yeah,
Sapir and Whorf as the
oh yeah,
Lord,
like the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis was a vocab word for some of my early cultural anthropology classes. Absolutely.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's unequivocally, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a shame. And again, these guys did good stuff. It's a shame. This is not what they should be remembered for. But it is what it is. But all I can do is, you're very kind and letting me come back on and spurg out for an hour and a half and swim upstream and be like, this is your language. I guess some takeaway points to sum it all up. Of course, language reflects culture, but I don't know if it controls culture. That's sort of a weird idea.
Yeah.
It feels right on first contact, maybe some bad pun intended there. But as you go a little bit farther down that rabbit hole, you start realizing that if your language determines the way you think, then people whose languages are different than yours must think differently, and you're very quickly into some strange waters. So
yeah, there's definitely, and just a caveat on that, there definitely is some effect of language, but there's also the there is a cognitive difference, and I think this has been established by brain scientists who I'm not my thing. I'm not a neuroscientist or even a neuroscience amateur, but there's definitely something there. But there's also like, why is their language different? And also,
Yeah.
it doesn't determine everything, which seems like Sapir-Whorf is making that connection without talking about how these changes came about, right?
Yeah, I highly recommend. Again, it's a biased take. It is biased.
Everything is, right?
I highly recommend The Language Hoax. By, again, I'm a fanboy of his. I don't mind saying it. John McWhorter breaks this down in ways that normal non-pointy-headed linguists can understand. Language Hoax. It's very witty and fun. And yeah, yay! I'm glad somebody liked it.
Yeah, Andrew, this was fantastic, and happy birthday as well.
Yes.
This was fantastic, Dr. Brown. It's good to hear the other sides of this topic. And again, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Do you? I mean, are we at a natural endpoint here?
This
Do
is
you have
a
anything
natural
else you
endpoint.
want to
I mean,
say?
we could talk about the weird sort of like love triangles that are happening in anthropology and linguistics.
Let's do it.
But I don't know.
Yeah. Let's do it. Let's do it.
I have a little bit more time. Yeah. So Sapir. So
yeah, as long as you have the time.
Yeah. No, I got about 30 minutes or so, and then I do actually have to hilariously go teach. So
this is probably way better. You have a much more
this is so
interested
much
audience
fun.
here.
I don't have to worry about getting canceled, and like, yeah, it's just I can say things like the Germans ruined anthropology, and I won't get called into the dean's office. You know, this is just great.
You're not even allowed. I thought you were allowed to criticize white cultures. I love doing that.
Well, maybe they. I guess they don't care too much about the Germans, but yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, mid-century Germans, though, I don't know. They do care about those. Yeah.
Right. This is a good suggestion as well. Maybe ask AI to create a discussion just out of
brilliant.
verbs.
That is, thank you, Rebirth of the Word. That's a brilliant idea. I'm going to try that. Thank you. That's a brilliant idea.
How cool would it be if we could figure out the connections between language families through deep time? Absolutely, that would be very cool. If we can ever do that. But yeah, let's talk about these love triangles, and then we'll get out of here.
We all know the universal language is Enochian.
Enochian.
Enochian. I just did. If I can shill just a little bit. I on the Scarlet Thread Society, which is connected to the Timeline Earth family of podcasts. I just did an episode with Paz looking at John D and his Enochian script. So if people are interested, check it out.
Timeline Earth is not a friend necessarily of this show, but a friend of a friend, as they are heavily connected to the Biting the Bullet guys, who are my co-hosts on 5 Till Midnight, which is the politics show we do every Monday night at 8 p.m. Where I am the liberal, by the way, on that show. Yeah. Not that I'm super conservative. I am in like culturally, I guess, but like also I'm the dissension on there. But yeah, go ahead.
What you're saying. So anyhow, Edward Sapir. Again, these people did great work. It's just they're people, right? Like, and it doesn't mean they need to be canceled. I'm not trying to cancel anyone. We should be critical, right? Like, we should, in the truest sense of critical, like, hey, like, does this pass the smell test, right? That's all I'm asking. I'm asking for a smell test on things. That's fine. And people are going to smell differently. That's fine. Some people like certain scents. Some people, I don't like patchouli, right? I don't like patchouli. Some people like patchouli. That's fine. But we should at least be sniffing.
Yes.
Not glue, but these ideas. Yeah. Don't do drugs. Okay, so Sapir, actually, this is something that I literally discovered like just last night. I was filling in the gaps for our live stream today. I was like, okay, I should just like double check a few things. So apparently, Edward Sapir, when his first wife died, kind of like started getting it on with Margaret Mead, and they were getting it on for a little bit, and then Sapir remarried. And I guess Mead found out, and it sounds like she was already in Samoa at that time, and like in what appears to me to be something of a ritual, kind of burnt their correspondence on the beach in Samoa.
Holy crap!
So, I mean, make of that what you will. That says nothing about any of their ideas, but it's just I find that like absolutely hilarious. Because I also didn't do the math, but I'm certain there was something of a notable age gap between Sapir and Mead at this time, and that is, as you've pointed out before, unfortunately very common. I will call out one of my fields in linguistics. Improprieties between professors and graduate students, and sometimes undergraduate students, is not unheard of. And that's true for every field. So I'm not saying we're
Uh-huh.
like uniquely bad, but I do think it. What I'm trying to say is academics are not above at least the moral law, right? Like they just because somebody has a PhD next to their name and has done stuff, quote unquote, and published things, quote unquote, does not make them like perfect human beings. And I think anyone who has actually, knows any PhD will know this. And
You're not going to find anyone
yeah,
disagreeing with that in my
yeah.
comment section,
But
very
the
likely.
the reason I pointed out is because we live in a culture that views PhDs as almost a priestly caste.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're the priest caste of the progressive world, and this is stuff I really can't say when I'm teaching. And as such, like they're infallible, right? The infallible quote unquote experts. I'm like, well, my brother in Christ, I know many experts, and some of them are really great, and some of them are ridiculous, and
Mm-hmm.
they all have the same kind of degree. So I don't know, like,
Yeah.
you test
And there's
again.
a 17-year age gap, by the
Yeah,
way.
it's a little
And
weird.
Margaret Mead would have been in her early to mid 20s at this point.
And that's not uncommon. I'm not going to say it's all the time, but it still happens. I tell these tales that I won't bring out because I don't know if they're substantiated or not. I hear rumblings through, as Jimmy Buffett would say, the coconut telegraph. The coconut telegraph of academia. I hear these stories sometimes, like, this is all very disconcerting. And I'm not saying we need a Me Too movement necessarily, but maybe we just need to like get people to keep it in the pants and start thinking about languages for real. Like,
Yeah.
this is just, come on.
I mean, this used to be a accepted thing. Now it's at least like outwardly accepted thing of like professors, usually male, having relationships with younger women, including their own students. This was like a thing.
It was a thing.
And it was allowed. Whereas
It was
now
allowed,
it's at
yeah.
least explicitly not allowed, even though it still happens.
Well, and you'd be
probably
surprised,
less.
it actually goes both ways. I can think of an example that's non-substantiated, so I won't even bring it up because I don't want to. It's non-substantiated, and it was dealt with, I think, in a settlement outside of any formal legal proceeding. So I won't bring it up. But there was a notable. I got to keep it pretty general. I'm sorry on this, but there was a notable example of a famous cultural studies American female professor who was accused of acting in an inappropriate way to a male graduate student.
A graduate student, though, is a lot less heinous to me.
Yes.
Regardless of the gender mix.
I mean,
It's still a power dynamic
unwanted
issue.
sexual advances, right? Like,
Right.
regardless of how you slice it. If somebody, I mean, again, I am not. Me Too is this ridiculous feminist. I'm not a feminist at all. But I mean,
Right.
if somebody doesn't want something, no.
I was thinking
it's
consensually.
bad. Like,
okay, no, that's bad. Oh,
Yeah, you should, like, unwanted advances are really cringe, and you should not do them. Like, and so, yeah. Anyhow, I could tell you more, but I probably would get in some trouble. So, because I heard some things in sort of a secretive way. So anyhow,
yeah, that's not good.
It's not good. It's not good. It's not good. It's not good. And it's more common than you think. And so, this isn't to say that all PhDs are bad. Most PhDs are fine. It's just that it's made up of, it's a group of people, and anytime you get groups of people, you're going to get bad ones in the mix. And again, all I'm saying is the sniff test, right? Sniff test the field, sniff test their ideas, sniff test their person. If they're legit people, you can disagree with legit people. I disagree with legit people all the time, and I respect them immensely.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I'm kind of a fanboy of his, I actually have profound linguistic disagreements with John McWhorter. I think he's wrong about some things in certain languages, and that's fine, right? It's okay, because I can see that he's a legit guy doing legit stuff. But yeah, I don't know. Don't be involved sexually with people who are like working under you. It's the most normal, basic thing to say.
Yeah,
So,
seriously. A big issue in the military as well.
For sure.
Yeah, huge issue. There's actually, like in the Marine Corps, and this is true in other branches as well, but there is a joke that there's a rank, private first class, right? E2, so it's one of the lowest ranks. And PFC is what they're called as an acronym, and people joke openly that a PFC it does not mean private first class. It means perfect for corporal, which is the lowest NCO rank. A PFC is perfect for corporal, which is very, very inappropriate relationship for a corporal and NCO to be having a sexual relationship with a junior Marine. It's not appropriate at all, especially if they're in the same command, but it is a thing that does occur.
Yeah. I'm I mean, not to put this on anyone else, but I'll just speaking personally. I'm a wife guy. I really love my wife. She's awesome,
Yeah.
and she's
Yeah.
very
Monogamy is based.
very smart, and she's very well educated. But she decided she just did not want to go on to graduate school, and I think that was a good decision for her. Not because women aren't smart, but because you should not have. This is my opinion. Whether it's you should not have two people in a relationship who are both academics, because I've seen so many examples of this go absolutely crazy. And when you talk to academic couples, by and large, okay, I can think of one example, and they're awesome people. But I've seen a lot of crazy, weird, like couples. They're like academic power couples where like they're talking and they're like kind of clearly dick measuring about who has published more papers. And I'm like, this is just the most and you're like at a party at a department event with them, and you're like just drinking more Franzia wine because you just need to get blitzed to get through this event, because you're like, this is the most awkward shit I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
And I'm just so thankful that that I'm not married to another academic.
You shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
Like disagreeing like that with your partner publicly, regardless of what the nature of your relationship is. That's insane.
More endowments and and funding and stuff. It's really cringe, and it makes me just depressed, because it sadly is something of a trend in the field, academia in general, and something like that. It's just too much. It's all too much. Again, I think that academia there's good work that comes out that academics do, but there's just a lot of also doo-doo that comes out of it, like just bullshit that like is produced largely by people just fighting with each other over random stuff and not really solving or not getting to the core of issues and not doing a good sniff test. So anyhow, just some anecdotes there. We could talk forever. I probably don't need to, but yeah, it's and again, you're sharing about the stuff in the military. I have not served, so I don't know that, but I've heard this from you and from multiple people about just how much of this is kind of an issue.
Yeah,
and
it really is. It's bad. It's not good.
Yeah.
And I've personally seen, specifically in my case, younger women, lower ranked junior Marines, getting special treatment, which doesn't happen in every case, but special treatment in the form of literal, like career advancement from this. And look, for you as an individual, if you're the one trying to do that, I mean, I would do some cunnilingus on a gunnery sergeant if it meant me getting promoted. I back in the day, I definitely would have done that, but that doesn't make it okay. As a thing.
I mean, would does not to make a joke using modal verbs. Would does not mean should.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Again, the would meme has gotten really popular, but not the should meme. We should bring back the should meme. Should you though?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
What we should be doing is making giant statues like the Mongolians have of Genghis Khan. That's what we should be doing.
Yeah. Well, they're the original mid-century Germans, so they can.
Yeah, they kind of were a lot of ways.
Yeah.
All right, man. I think we're all done here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. You're welcome anytime.
Cool.
And anybody in the comments, thank you for joining us. And I will be on Daniela Pensac's Culturama tonight on Rumble later tonight. And in the meantime, I'm going to be editing an episode on Machiavelli I did with a PhD student who was very knowledgeable, Amanda Griffiths, I think. I might be getting that wrong. But yeah. The mic got up right as we were ending. Sorry, man. But yeah, we're all done here. But I will be on Daniela Pensac's Rumble tonight. Culturama is her new show. That should be a lot of fun. And look out for that episode, which I should have edited here pretty soon, on Machiavelli and what people get Machiavelli wrong. It was an amazing conversation with Amanda that we had. I absolutely loved it, and I think you guys will too.
I'll have to check it out. I'm a big fan of. As I always say, I'm a fox, not a lion. I love his fox lion distinction. It's pretty great. I'll have to check that out. Yeah.
All right. Absolutely. And Patreon's down below, $2 a month. The episode is uncut. I'm going to cut out quite a bit of that Machiavelli episode to post it. $2 a month, link in the description, and Axios Fitness. Also remember to put the cart back.
Yes.
Later, everybody. Oh, actually, last thing. Thanks for the great discussion, even despite all the words you used. Yeah, next time I'll consider putting Subway Surfers on the screen for those that can't pay attention.
Yeah.
All right, later.